It's just one last bet, I whispered. By sunrise, I owed $12,400 and slept on a park bench. My name is Ethan. I'm a casino dealer. I thought dealing cards made me smart about odds. I had an apartment, steady tips, and 6 years of watching other people lose their money. I believed I was different. I started small, basketball games, poker with friends. Just using my tip money, never my real paycheck. That felt safe. That felt controlled. But safe lines move. One night became weekends. Tip money became rent money. I kept telling myself I understood the game better than everyone else. The house always wins, except when it was me playing. Then the rules felt different. That I watched customers chase their losses every shift. I saw the look in their eyes, the shaky hands, the empty stares. I never saw it in the mirror. Not until that final night when my own rent money disappeared in 2 hours. And I realized I'd become every broken player I'd ever pitted. When the person who deals the cards can't stop playing them. Who's really in control, the expert or the addiction? Jimmy Chin walked up to my table at 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in March. I remember the time because I'd been watching the clock, waiting for my break. 6 years dealing blackjack at Riverside Casino, and Jimmy was one of those players you could set your watch by. Every Tuesday and Friday, same seat when he could get it. Always $20 hands. Never more than $200 in his pocket. But something was off that night. He sat down heavy, like his bones hurt. Usually Jimmy would nod, maybe ask how my night was going. This time he just stared at the felt and pulled out a wrinkled 20. His hands shook a little when he placed the bet. How's it going, Jimmy? I dealt the cards smooth and practiced. 6 for him, queen for me showing. Been better. He looked at his cards without really seeing them. Hit on 16. Busted. The next hand, same thing. $20 bet. But his eyes kept drifting somewhere else. I could see his car keys on the table beside his chips, and there was something white sticking out from under them. Paper. Official looking. Hit me. 17 showing. Jimmy never hit 17. You sure? He nodded. Drew a 4. 21. That's when I knew Jimmy was in trouble. Not because he won, because of how he won. No smile, no thanks. Just stared at the chips like they'd appeared by magic. In 6 years of dealing, I'd learned to read the signs. The shaky hands were bad. The poor decisions were worse. But the blank stare after a win? That was dangerous. Jimmy won the next 3 hands. His stack grew from 1 chip to 8, 20 to 160. A good night for most players. Jimmy just kept staring. Drink. Carla, the cocktail waitress, stopped by our table. She knew Jimmy's routine too. Diet Coke, no ice. Whiskey, Jimmy said. Double. Carla raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. I dealt another hand. Jimmy had a pair of 8s against my 7. Basic strategy says split. Jimmy doubled his bet instead and took 1 card. Got a 3. 19. I flipped my whole card. 6. Drew a king. Bust. Jimmy won again. Now he had $320 in front of him. More money than I'd ever seen him play with. He reached for his wallet, pulled out 4 more 20s. You sure about that, Jimmy? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Dealers aren't supposed to give advice, but Jimmy looked like he was sleepwalking. That he glanced up at me for the first time all night. His eyes were red-rimmed and tired. Just cards, right? Just a game. I dealt the next hand. Jimmy bet $40. Lost. Bet 60. Lost. The stack he'd built started shrinking fast. His breathing got shallowed. That's when the paper under his keys caught my attention again. I could see the header now. Dissolution of marriage. The words hit me like a brick. Jimmy's wife had left him. Probably took the kid too, from the look on his face. That I kept dealing. Jimmy kept betting bigger. The whiskey came and went down fast. He ordered another. Where's the ATM? Jimmy asked when his chips hit 0. My stomach dropped. Jimmy had never asked about the ATM. Not once in 2 years of regular play. Past the slots, near the restroom. I watched him gather up his keys and divorce papers. Jimmy, but he was already walking away, moving like a man underwater. I'd seen this movie before. Hundreds of times. Regular player hits a bad patch in life. Comes in looking for escape. Wins a little, loses a lot. Chases the wins with money they can't afford to lose. Always ends the same way. The difference was, I actually liked Jimmy. He was polite, tipped decent, never caused trouble. Seeing him head toward that ATM felt like watching a car crash in slow motion. 3 minutes later, he was back with $400 bills. People think dealing cards for 6 years makes you smart about gambling. They're right, Just not the way they think. That I started at Riverside Casino in 2017, 28 years old and broke after a construction job ended badly. The casino was hiring, paid decent, and came with benefits. Plus, I figured I'd learn something about cards along the way. The training lasted 3 weeks. They taught us the mechanics first, how to shuffle, deal, count chips, spot mark cards. Basic stuff. But the real education came from watching players night after night. You learn to read people when their money's on the line. The tells, the patterns, the way hope and fear play across someone's face. Most dealers hate the job after a year. They get tired of drunk players, smoke, late hours. Not me. I found it fascinating, like being a scientist studying human behavior. Every night brought new data about how people make decisions under pressure. That's when I started my own experiments. It began small. March Madness 2018, just a few basketball bets with friends. 20 here, 50 there. Nothing serious. I told myself it was research, studying the game from the player's side. How could I understand gambling if I never gambled? My first real win was Kentucky versus Duke in the Elite Eight. I bet $40 on Kentucky plus the points. They covered by 12. I walked away with $74 and felt like I'd cracked some kind of code. Easy money. I told Dave Kowalski, one of the other dealers, the next morning before our shift. Dave laughed. That's what they all say. But Dave was wrong. This was different. I wasn't some tourist blowing his vacation money. I had inside knowledge. I understood odds, house edge, probability. I could spot when other players were making emotional decisions instead of smart ones. The basketball bets led to poker games. Dave and Tommy Brennan, another dealer, had a regular thing going. Kitchen table games at Dave's place on Saturday nights. $5 blinds, $30 buy-in. Friendly stuff. I started joining them. The games were small, but they felt important. I was learning poker from the ground up, studying my opponents, applying everything I'd learned about reading people at the casino. Tommy was aggressive, bluffed too much. Dave played tight, only bet when he had strong hands. Mike from security called everything, never folded. Once I figured out their patterns, winning became mathematical. I kept detailed records. Buy-ins, cash-outs, hourly rates. Treated it like a business. After 3 months, I was up $430. Not bad for a part-time hobby. You're getting good at this, Tommy said one Saturday night after I'd taken down a big pot with a well-timed bluff. It's all about information, I said. Stacking chips. Most people play with their emotions. I play with my brain. Tommy grinned. You know, there's a bigger game across town on weekends. More serious players. You might like it. The idea intrigued me. Bigger games meant better opponents, higher stakes, more money to be made. But it also meant stepping outside my comfort zone. The kitchen table games felt safe, controlled. I knew these guys. Trusted them. What kind of money we talking about? I asked. $200 buy-in. Sometimes more. $200. That was significant money for me back then. More than a night's tips. But I was confident. 6 months of steady profits at Dave's table had proven my system worked. I understood the math, could read the players, controlled my emotions. Let me think about it, I said, but I'd already decided. The house always wins because it has better information than the players. I had better information than most players too. I just needed to find the right game to prove it. My phone buzzed with a text. Tommy, sending me details about a game this weekend. Higher stakes, but nothing I couldn't handle. I was ready to take the next step. Jimmy came back to my table with $400 bills, fresh from the ATM, crisp and new, like they'd never been touched. He sat down harder this time, like the weight of what he was doing had settled on his shoulders. The bills shook slightly in his hands as he slid them across the felt. Change these up. I counted out the hundreds. How do you want them? 20s. He paused. Actually, give me some 50s too. Red flag. Players who asked for specific denominations were usually planning something. Small bills meant they were trying to make their money last longer. Big bills meant they were planning to bet big. I gave him 16 20s and 4 50s. Jimmy stacked them neat and placed a $20 bet. Same as always. For a moment, I thought maybe he'd gotten control of himself. Maybe 400 was his limit, and he'd play it smart. Jimmy won the first hand. Then the second. By the third hand, his stack was back up to 500 and change. That's when everything went sideways. Let's try 50, he said, sliding a green chip into the betting circle. I dealt the cards. Jimmy had 12 against my 10 showing. Basic strategy says hit. Jimmy waved his hand. Stayed on 12. I flipped my whole card. 7. 17 for the house. Jimmy won with 12. See that? He said to nobody in particular. Sometimes you gotta trust your gut. Mrs. Patterson, a regular who'd been playing quietly at third base, looked up from her cards. She'd been coming to my table for 3 years. Always played perfect basic strategy. Never bet more than $10. She gave Jimmy the kind of look you'd give someone walking into traffic. Jimmy didn't notice. He was riding high now, convinced he'd found some kind of system. Next hand, he bet $100. Lost. Bet another 100. Lost again. His jaw tightened. The confidence from 2 minutes ago evaporated. Now he looked like a man trying to dig his way out of a hole with a teaspoon. Hit me. Jimmy had 16 against my 8. The book says stay, but Jimmy was past caring about the book. .6 of clubs. 22. Bust. Mrs. Patterson shook her head and gathered her chips. Good luck, honey, she said to Jimmy, but she was looking at me when she said it. She'd seen this movie before too. Jimmy was down to $200 now. The money he'd walked in with was gone, plus half the ATM withdrawal. But instead of slowing down, he started betting bigger. $60 hands, $80 hands. Making side bets on insurance that any dealer could tell you were sucker wagers. You sure about the insurance? I asked when he put $10 on it. Just deal the cards. I had blackjack. Jimmy lost his main bet and the insurance bet both. Down to $40 in chips. He sat there staring at what was left of his money. The whiskey was working on him now. I could see it in the way he blinked too slow, the way his shoulders sagged. For a second, I thought he might call it a night, cut his losses and go home. Instead, he pushed all $40 into the betting circle. All of it. He said that I dealt the hand. Jimmy got 19. Good hand. I showed a 6. Terrible for the dealer. Jimmy had a real chance to double his money back. That I flipped my whole card. 5. 11 total. Drew a queen. 21. Jimmy's last $40 disappeared. He sat there for a full minute, staring at the empty space where his chips used to be. The table felt quiet except for the distant sound of slot machines and the soft whoosh of the ventilation system. Where's that ATM again? He asked. My mouth went dry. Jimmy, maybe, the ATM, he said again. His voice was flat, mechanical. Where is it? Past the slots. Near the restroom. He nodded once and walked away without another word. Left his divorce papers on the table. I looked at them for a second, then slid them under the chip rack where they'd be safe. 2 minutes later, the papers were still there, but Jimmy hadn't come back yet. ATM transactions usually took 60 seconds, maybe 90 if there was a line. Mrs. Patterson's empty seat stared at me. She'd been smart enough to walk away when she saw trouble coming. Most players weren't that smart. 3 minutes. When Jimmy finally returned, he had 6 $100 bills in his hand. $600. The daily ATM limit. This wasn't going to end well. While Jimmy stacked his 600 in fresh bills, my phone buzzed against my leg. A notification from the DraftKings app. Tonight's Lakers game was tipping off in 2 hours. The spread looked juicy. Lakers favored by 8 against the Pistons at home. I kept dealing to Jimmy, but part of my mind was already calculating. Lakers had won 4 straight. Pistons were missing their starting point guard. 8 points seemed like free money. Jimmy bet $200 on his first hand back from the ATM. $200. More than most people made in a day. He had ace-6 against my king showing. Double down, he said, sliding another $200 across the felt. $400 riding on one hand. My stomach twisted, but I dealt the card. 3 of hearts. 20 for Jimmy. I flipped my whole card. 7. Drew a 6. 23. Bust. Jimmy won $800 in one hand. For the first time all night, he smiled. A real smile, not the empty stare from before. He looked like a man who'd just solved all his problems. I knew better. In 3 years of weekend trips to other casinos, places where nobody knew I dealt cards, I'd learned that big wins were just as dangerous as big losses. Maybe more dangerous. My system was simple. Never bet my base salary, only tips. Never play where I worked. Never bet more than I made in a week. Those rules had kept me safe, kept me smart. Last Saturday at Thunder Valley, I'd sat at a poker table for 6 hours and walked away with $280. Patience, discipline, reading the other players. The construction worker in seat 3 was too aggressive. The old man in the baseball cap only bet when he had the nuts. Information was power. Jimmy was up to 1,400 now, betting 300 a hand. The kind of money that could cover his rent, his car payment, maybe even help with lawyer fees. My phone buzzed again. 15 minutes until tip-off. I'd brought 240 in tips from last weekend. If I bet half on the Lakers, I could win 110. Not life-changing money, but enough to feel like I was participating instead of just watching other people play. Jimmy lost the next hand. Then won 2 in a row. Up and down like a roller coaster. "You having fun?" I asked during a shuffle. He looked at me like I'd asked him if he enjoyed having surgery. Fun's got nothing to do with it. That's when I realized Jimmy and I weren't so different. We both saw gambling as work, not recreation. We both believed we could outsmart the system. The difference was, I actually could. Lakers were warming up in Los Angeles. Game time in 10 minutes. Jimmy's $1,400 lasted another 37 minutes. I watched the clock on the wall as his stack got smaller with each hand. $300 bets became $500 bets. Basic strategy went out the window completely. He split 10s against my ace, doubled down on 13, took insurance every time I showed a face card. The other players at my table had left one by one. First Mrs. Patterson, then the young guy in the baseball cap, finally the woman with the Lucky Sevens t-shirt. Nobody wanted to watch Jimmy destroy himself by midnight. It was just me and him. "Hit me," Jimmy said. He had 18 showing. 18. You never hit 18. Jimmy hit me. I dealt the card. 3 of spades. 21. I flipped my cards. 19. Jimmy won. But he didn't look happy about it. He looked sick, like a man who just realized he was standing on thin ice and couldn't stop jumping up and down. "Maybe take a break," I suggested. "Get some coffee, stretch your legs." He shook his head. "I'm fine." But he wasn't fine. His hands trembled when he stacked chips. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the casino's aggressive air conditioning. His breathing was shallow and quick. The Lakers were up 12 at halftime. My $120 bet was looking good. Not that I could focus on basketball with Jimmy melting down 3 feet away. "Last hand," he said, pushing his remaining chips forward. $75. All of it. I dealt the cards. Jimmy got 16. I showed an ace. "Insurance?" I asked, knowing he'd take it. He put 25 on insurance. $51 left on the main bet. I checked my whole card. 10 of diamonds. Blackjack. Jimmy lost everything. He sat there staring at the empty felt in front of him. No chips, no money, no hope. Just divorce papers and car keys. "Jimmy," I said softly. "You okay?" He looked up at me with eyes that had gone completely dead. "There's a payday loan place around here, right?" My heart sank. Payday loans were the last stop before complete disaster. Interest rates that would make loan sharks blush. The kind of debt that followed you home and never left. "Jimmy, man, maybe you should. Is there or isn't there?" I thought about lying, telling him I didn't know. But he'd find it anyway. Everyone always found it. 2 blocks east on Riverside Drive, next to the subway. He nodded once and stood up, gathered his papers and keys like a man packing for a trip he didn't want to take. "Thanks for the games, Ethan." He walked away without looking back. Past the slot machines, past the poker room, past the sports book where someone else's Lakers bet was about to pay off. I watched until he disappeared through the main doors. An MY shift ended 15 minutes later. I clocked out, checked my phone. Lakers had won by 18. My bet paid out perfectly, but walking to my car, all I could think about was Jimmy's face when he lost that last hand. I should have driven straight home. Instead, I took the long way through the parking lot. Jimmy's Honda Civic was still there, parked under a broken streetlight near the back corner. I could see him through the windshield, sitting in the driver's seat with his phone in his hands. For 5 minutes, I watched him stare at that phone. He'd pick it up like he was going to dial, then set it back down. Pick it up again, thumb hovering over the screen, then back to his lap. I knew that dance. The mental calculation of how to explain losing rent money to someone you loved. How to say you'd taken $3,000 that belonged to your family and fed it to machines that were designed to take it. Who do you call when you've done something that can't be undone? Finally, I drove home to my studio apartment on Maple Street. 600 square feet of secondhand furniture and empty pizza boxes. Not much, but it was mine. Paid for with honest work dealing cards to people like Jimmy. I sat on my couch and opened my banking app. The screen glowed blue in the dark room. Checking account. $1,247.83. Not great, but not terrible. Rent was due Friday, $8.90 for a place that smelled like the previous tenant's cigarettes and had a bathroom door that didn't quite close. After rent, I'd have enough for groceries and gas until next week's paycheck. Credit cards were a different story. $2,800 spread across 3 cards. Mostly cash advances from the last few months when my gambling had gotten more aggressive. Nothing I couldn't handle, but the minimums were eating into my base salary that I closed the banking app and opened DraftKings. The Lakers bet had cleared, $231.20 in my account. Easy money, just like I'd thought. But sitting there in my dark apartment, thinking about Jimmy's empty stare, the wind felt hollow. Like I'd stolen something from a man who was already drowning. My phone rang. Unknown number. Hello, Ethan. It's Tommy. You still up? Tommy never called this late unless something was wrong. Yeah, what's up? Poker game tomorrow night. Different crowd, bigger stakes. You interested? How big? Buy-in's 200. But the action's good. Fish with deep pockets, if you know what I mean. $200. More than I'd ever played before. But I had the Lakers money plus another 100 in tips from this week. $330 total. Enough to buy in and still have money left over. Where's the game? Warehouse District. I'll text you the address. After Tommy hung up, I sat in the quiet apartment thinking about Jimmy's Honda Civic. Was he still out there, staring at his phone? Had he called his ex-wife to confess? His parents? A lawyer? Or was he walking into that payday loan office, signing papers that would trap him for months? I pushed the thoughts away. Jimmy's problems weren't my problems. I was different from Jimmy. Smarter. More disciplined. Tomorrow night, I'd prove it. The warehouse sat in an industrial part of town where nobody asked questions. No signs, no lights except for a single bulb over a steel door. Tommy led me through a maze of hallways that smelled like motor oil and old concrete. Remember, he said as we walked, these guys don't mess around. No credit, no IOUs. You lose your buy-in, you go home. The poker room was smaller than I'd expected. 1 table, 8 chairs, cards so worn the faces were barely visible. But the players looked serious. Construction workers still in their work clothes. A woman in a business suit checking her phone. A cop I recognized from traffic stops near the casino. Welcome to the big leagues. Tommy whispered that I pulled out 4 $50 bills and slid them across to the dealer. Real dealer, not one of the players. This wasn't kitchen table poker anymore. The woman in the suit introduced herself as Patricia. Lawyer, she said. Been playing here for 2 years. The cop was Martinez. Off duty, looking to make some extra money for his kids' college fund. The construction workers didn't give names. Just nodded and went back to their cards. First hand, I got pocket jacks. Good starting hand, but not great. I raised to $15. 2 callers. Flop came Jack 6-2, rainbow. Top set. Beautiful. Patricia bet 25. Martinez folded. I raised to 75. Big bet for early in the night. Patricia said, studying my face, that I kept my expression neutral. 6 years of dealing cards teaches you to hide emotions. I like my hand. She called. Turn card was a 9. No straight draws, no flush draws. I was golden. Patricia checked. I bet 125. She studied me for 30 seconds. In the kitchen games with Dave and Tommy, 30 seconds felt like forever. Here, it felt professional. Like she was doing math I couldn't see. Finally, she folded. I dragged in a $230 pot. Nice hand, Martinez said. Over the next 3 hours, I played the tightest, most disciplined poker of my life. Folded marginal hands that would have tempted me in smaller games. Valued bet when I was strong. Bluffed only when I had to. By 2 a.m., I was up $320. My $200 buy-in had become $520. More than half my monthly rent, won in one night. You're pretty good at this, Patricia said during a break. Ever think about playing bigger games? How much bigger? There's a game downtown. Friday nights. 500 buy-in, but the action's worth it. Businessmen with more money than sense. $500. Serious money. But if I could turn tonight's 200 into 520, what could I do with 500? Think about it, Patricia said, handing me a business card. Text me if you're interested. I drove home as the sun started rising. $520 richer than when the night began. In the rearview mirror, the warehouse district looked like another world. A world where skill mattered more than luck. Where smart players took money from dumb ones. That I was definitely a smart player. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. Friday's game is at 8 p.m. Let me know by Thursday if you want in. I looked at the business card on my passenger seat. Patricia Valdez, attorney at law. This wasn't some back alley hustle. This was professional poker. $500. It was a lot of money, but I had $520 from tonight plus my regular paycheck coming Wednesday. More than enough to cover the buy-in and still pay rent for the first time in months. I felt like I was getting ahead instead of just getting by. The voicemail from Mr. Rodriguez came Tuesday morning while I was trying to sleep off Saturday night's poker game. Ethan, it's your landlord. Rent was due yesterday. I know things happen, but I need the payment by Wednesday or we'll have to talk about late fees. Call me back. I checked my phone. 11:47 a.m. Rent was due Monday, and it was Tuesday. One day late, but still late. That I sat up in bed and did the math. Saturday's poker win had been $520. I'd spent $40 on groceries Sunday, $60 on gas, $30 on lunch yesterday. That left $390. Rent was $890, short by $500. My checking account had $280 after this week's grocery run. Credit cards were maxed except for one, a Chase card with $400 in available credit. I'd never taken a cash advance before. Always seemed like something desperate people did. But this wasn't desperation. This was temporary cash flow management. Friday's poker game would more than cover the cash advance fee. The Chase website made it easy. Click here for instant cash. Available in your account within minutes. I clicked without thinking too hard about the interest rate. $400 appeared in my checking account like magic. Add the $280 I already had, and I could pay most of the rent today. Promised the rest by Friday. Mr. Rodriguez answered on the second ring. Ethan, good to hear from you. Sorry about the delay. I can get you $680 today, the rest by Friday. Will that work? Silence on the other end. Then, I suppose. But Ethan, this is the second time in 3 months. Everything okay? Just a timing thing with my paycheck. It won't happen again. All right, but I need the full amount Friday, plus a $50 late fee. No problem. After I hung up, I drove to the bank and withdrew the cash. $680 in 20s, rubber banded and ready. Dropped them off at Mr. Rodriguez's office with a note promising the rest by Friday. Walking back to my car, I felt relieved. Crisis averted. All I needed was a decent night at Patricia's game, and everything would be squared. And I worked a double shift Tuesday to earn extra tip money. 8 hours turned into 10 when the night dealer called in sick. My feet ached and my eyes burned from cigarette smoke, but I walked out with $140 in tips. Thought Wednesday's paycheck was direct deposited at midnight. $412 after taxes and insurance. Add the tip money, and I had enough for the poker buy-in plus groceries. Thursday morning, I texted Patricia, I'm in for Friday night. She responded immediately, great. Address is 1247 Market Street, downtown. 8 p.m. sharp. Bring cash. $500 felt heavy in my pocket Friday afternoon. More money than I'd ever carried at one time. But it also felt like potential energy. 500 could become 1,000. 1,000 could solve every financial problem I had. The downtown address was a converted loft building. Glass and steel, nothing like the warehouse game. This was upscale poker. Patricia met me at the elevator. Ready for the big time? I patted the money in my pocket. Born ready. The loft apartment looked like something from a magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows, leather furniture, a custom poker table that probably cost more than my car. This wasn't a warehouse game or kitchen table poker. This was serious money. 8 players, $500 buy-in. For $1,000 on the table before we dealt the first hand, Patricia introduced me around. Kevin, a semi-professional who played full-time. 2 guys who owned restaurants. An accountant who reminded me of Jimmy. A day trader who kept checking his phone between hands. I tried to look confident pulling out my $500 in cash, but my hands shook slightly. At the warehouse game, $200 had felt like a lot. Here, $500 was just the entry fee. First time, Kevin asked, stacking his chips with practiced efficiency. Second, I lied. Different crowd last time. The blinds were bigger than anything I'd played before. $5 and $10 instead of 1 and 2. Suddenly, my $500 stack looked smaller. 50 big blinds instead of the 100 I was used to. First hour went well. I played tight, folded marginal hands, won a couple small pots. By 10 p.m., I was up to $780. The accountant was drinking too much wine. The day trader couldn't stop bluffing, both leaking money to better players. Nice fold, Kevin said when I mucked pocket sevens to his raise. Most players would have called there. I was getting respect. These weren't tourists or weekend warriors. These were serious players, and they were treating me like one of them. At 11:30, I got dealt ace-queen of hearts. Beautiful hand. Kevin raised from early position. The accountant called. I raised to $90. Kevin thought for a minute, then pushed all his chips forward. All in. My stomach dropped. Kevin had me covered by at least $200. If I called and lost, I'd be out my entire buy-in. But ace-queen suited was a strong hand. Kevin had been tight all night. If he was bluffing, this was my chance to double up. I call. Kevin flipped over pocket aces. The nuts. I was drawing to 3 queens or runner straight. The flop came king jack 5. No help. Turn was a 10. Still no queen. River was a 9. Kevin's aces held up. I'd lost my entire $500 in one hand. Good call, Kevin said, shaking my hand. Wrong time to run into rockets. The other players offered condolences, but I barely heard them. $500. Gone. More than half my monthly rent, evaporated in 30 seconds that I walked to my car in a daze. The downtown streets were busy with Friday night crowds heading to bars and restaurants. Normal people spending normal money on normal things that I sat in the parking garage for 20 minutes, trying to process what had happened. The money was gone. Really gone. And I still owed Mr. Rodriguez $260 by tomorrow. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Pre-approved for $800 instant loan. Apply now with just your driver's license. Payday loan. The same trap Jimmy had walked into 4 days ago. I stared at the text for a full minute, then deleted it. But as I drove home to my studio apartment, I kept thinking about that $800. Just enough to cover rent. Maybe even try a smaller game tomorrow night. Just a temporary solution until I could get back on my feet. Sunday afternoon. I sat on my couch with bills spread across the coffee table like evidence at a crime scene. Rent notice from Mr. Rodriguez. Credit card statements. Bank statements. My phone with the payday loan text I deleted and re-downloaded 3 times. The math was brutal but simple. Owed $260 to Mr. Rodriguez, due yesterday. Checking account, $120 credit available, $0. Chase card maxed from cash advance. Next paycheck, $380 after taxes. Not due until Friday. I needed money now. Not Friday. Now I'd avoided Mr. Rodriguez's calls since yesterday. 3 voicemails, each one more concerned than angry. He was being decent about it, which somehow made things worse. Dave and Tommy didn't know about my financial problems. In 6 years of working together, we'd never talked about money beyond complaining about cheap tippers. How do you tell your coworkers you can't pay rent because you lost it playing poker? The payday loan app was right there on my phone. $800, deposited in minutes. Interest rate was ugly, 120% APR, but it was just temporary. One good poker night would cover everything. I opened my laptop and looked up Monday Night Football. Bears versus Packers at Lambeau Field. Packers favored by 7 points. Home team, playing for playoff position. Bears coming off 3 straight losses. Packers -7 felt like free money. If I bet my last 120 on Green Bay, I could win about 110. Still short of what I needed, but closer. And if the Packers covered big, maybe I could parlay that into more bets. My finger hovered over the payday loan application. Driver's license number. Social Security. Bank account information. Everything they needed to put $800 in my account and $1,700 worth of debt on my shoulders. But what choice did I have? Get evicted? Sleep in my car? I filled out the application. Approved in 3 minutes. $800 appeared in my checking account like a magic trick. Suddenly, I had $920 total. Enough to pay Mr. Rodriguez and have money left over. I drove to his office Monday morning with $310 in cash. The remainder of what I owed plus late fees. There we go, he said, counting the bills. I was starting to worry. Sorry about the delay. Won't happen again. Mr. Rodriguez studied my face. 20 years of being a landlord had probably taught him to read people. Everything all right, Ethan? You look tired. Just working extra shifts. Casino hours, you know? He nodded, but didn't look convinced. Well, take care of yourself. And remember, rent's due on the 1st every month. Not the 3rd or the 5th. Absolutely. Walking back to my car, I felt temporarily relieved. Crisis averted again. I had $610 left, enough for groceries and gas until Friday's paycheck. But Friday's paycheck was already spoken for. The payday loan payment would be $340, plus interest, plus fees that I sat in my car doing the math. After the loan payment, I'd have maybe $200 to live on until the next payday. Then the cycle would start over. Unless I could win enough to break the cycle. Monday Night Football kicked off in 6 hours. Packers -7 at home. I opened the betting app and stared at the screen. $120 on Green Bay would win about $109. Not life-changing money, but enough to feel like I was doing something instead of just drowning slowly. The bet was placed before I could talk myself out of it. Packers were down 12 at halftime. Monday night at Riverside. I dealt cards while my phone burned a hole in my pocket. Every time a new customer sat down, I fought the urge to check the score. Packers down 12 at halftime. My $120 circling the drain. The casino felt different when you had money riding on something happening 2,000 miles away. Every minute stretched like an hour. Every chip stack seemed to mock my own empty pockets. "You okay tonight?" asked Mrs. Chun, a regular who played perfect basic strategy and tipped $5 every hour like clockwork. "You seem distracted." "Just tired," I said, dealing her a blackjack. "Long weekend." But I wasn't tired. I was calculating. If the Packers lost, I'd have $490 left until Friday. Enough for groceries if I was careful. Enough to survive until the next paycheck, which was already earmarked for the payday loan payment. My dinner break. I checked my phone in the employee parking lot. Packers had cut it to 7. Still losing, but closer. A field goal and a touchdown could turn everything around. I walked back inside, feeling cautiously optimistic. One good quarter. That's all I needed. 20 minutes later, the Packers threw an interception in the red zone. Game over. My $120 was gone. I finished my shift in a fog. Dealt cards, counted chips, made small talk with players who had no idea their dealer was falling apart in real time. At 3 a.m., I clocked out and sat in my car staring at my phone. $73.42 in checking. Credit cards maxed. Payday loan due Friday. My hands shook as I opened another loan app. This one promised $300 with just a photo of my driver's license. The interest rate was even worse than the first one, but what choice did I have? Approved in minutes. $373 appeared in my account like a magic trick that was losing its charm. Tuesday morning, I drove to Mr. Rodriguez's office with the money I'd promised him. $310 in cash, crisp 20s from the payday loan ATM. "Right on time," he said, counting the bills. "I appreciate the follow-through." "No problem." But it was a problem. A big problem that was getting bigger every day. As I walked back to my car, I did the math. 2 payday loans now. Monthly payments that would eat up most of my base salary. I was borrowing money to pay back borrowed money. The cycle was clear, but I couldn't see a way out that didn't involve winning. And winning meant gambling. Tommy texted that afternoon. "Game Thursday night. Smaller buy-in, 150. You in?" I stared at the message for 10 minutes. I had $260 left. Rent was paid for this month, but next month was 3 weeks away. If I could turn 150 into 4 or 500, I could get ahead of the payday loan cycle. "What kind of players?" I texted back. "Mixed bag. Couple fish, couple decent players. Nothing like Friday's crew." Fish meant weak players. Weak players meant opportunity. I'd been playing solid poker for months before Friday's disaster. One bad beat didn't erase all that skill. "I'm in," I texted, but sitting in my apartment that night, I couldn't shake the memory of Kevin's pocket aces beating my ace-queen. The way $500 had vanished in 30 seconds. The feeling of walking to my car empty-handed while other people's money changed ownership at a green felt table. Maybe I wasn't as smart as I thought. Maybe the house always won because players like me always thought we were smarter than players like Jimmy. My phone buzzed with Tommy's follow-up text. "Games at the warehouse. Thursday, 8 p.m. Bring cash." I deleted the message, then immediately wished I hadn't. Thursday was 2 days away. 2 days to figure out whether I was a smart player who'd hit some bad luck, or just another guy lying to himself about mathematics and self-control. The line between those two things was thinner than I wanted to admit. November brought rain and a new routine. I didn't want to admit was a routine. Tuesday nights at Tommy's warehouse game. Saturday nights trying to find action somewhere else. Wednesday afternoons refreshing payday loan apps to see how much credit I qualified for. The math had become a living thing that followed me everywhere. How much I owed versus how much I made versus how much I needed to win to break even. The numbers changed daily, but they always added up to the same thing. More than I had. Point 3 payday loan apps now. Advance America, check into cash, something called Quick Dollar that charged fees I didn't want to calculate. Together, they'd loaned me $2,400 that had somehow become $3,100 with interest and fees that why credit cards weren't just maxed, they were over limit. Accumulating penalty fees like snowflakes that turned into an avalanche when I wasn't looking, but I was still working. Still showing up for my shifts at Riverside, dealing cards to people who reminded me more and more of myself. The construction worker who played $5 hands, but always bought in for $300. The nurse who came in after double shifts and played until her money was gone. The retiree who swore he had a system for beating blackjack that I started making mistakes at work. Small ones at first. Miscounting chip stacks. Dealing the wrong number of cards. Forgetting to collect losing bets before paying winners. Everything all right at home? Asked Janet, my supervisor, during a rare slow moment between players. Fine, I said, practicing my shuffle. Just tired. You sure? You seemed off lately. Customers have noticed. Customers have noticed. The phrase hit me like a punch to the stomach. In 6 years of dealing, I prided myself on professionalism. Now I was the dealer people noticed for the wrong reasons. I'll tighten up, I promised. But how do you tighten up when you're falling apart? When every hand you deal reminds you of money you've lost. When every chip stack looks like rent money or grocery money or payday loan payments. I started carrying a notebook, tracking my wins and losses like a business expense report. Tuesday night, down $150. Saturday night, up $80. Wednesday sports bet, down $75. The numbers told a story I didn't want to read. 2 months of detailed records showed. I was down $1,800 since September, not counting the interest on borrowed money, not counting the opportunity cost of money I should have saved. But the notebook also showed something else. I was getting unlucky. Several nights where I'd played solid poker and lost to bad beats. Sports bets where I'd picked winners that didn't cover the spread. Card sequences that defied probability. The math would eventually correct itself. It had to. Good players got their money back over time. All I needed was one good run to offset the bad luck. You coming Thursday? Tommy asked after work one Tuesday. New players going to be there. Rich guy, owns car dealerships. Word is he plays loose. Rich guy who plays loose. Exactly what I needed. Someone with money who made emotional decisions instead of mathematical ones. Buy-in still $150. Yep, should be a good game. I had $185 in my wallet. Tip money from 3 shifts. Carefully saved despite the mounting debt. Just enough for the buy-in plus gas money. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to my upstairs neighbor's TV through the thin walls. Some late-night movie with gunshots and screeching tires. Appropriate soundtrack for a life that felt like it was careening towards something I couldn't see coming. Janet had scheduled a formal check-in meeting for next week. Just to touch base, she'd said, but I knew what that meant. Shape up or ship out. Stop making mistakes or find another job. The irony was perfect. I was dealing cards to pay off gambling debts. Working in a casino to fund my own losses at other casinos. The house was winning twice. Once when I lost at other tables. Again when they paid me a salary that went straight back into gambling. Thursday's game was 2 days away. Rich guy who plays loose. New fish in familiar water. All I needed was one good night to break the cycle. One good night to prove I was still a smart player who'd hit some temporary bad luck. The line between smart and desperate was harder to find every day. December brought a new regular to my table. Danny Morales, 26. Construction worker with paint still under his fingernails and the kind of confidence that came from never losing anything important. He reminded me of myself 2 years ago. Danny started small. $20 hands. Basic strategy, modest tips when he won. The kind of player every dealer appreciated. Polite, predictable, profitable for the house, but not obnoxiously so. But I could see the signs. The way he studied other players' big bets. The questions about poker room hours and tournament schedules. The casual mentions of sports betting and fantasy football payouts. You ever play poker? He asked during a slow shuffle Tuesday night. Little bit, I said. Nothing serious. I've been thinking about trying it. Seems like skill matters more than luck. There it was. The exact thought that had started my own slide from casual player to desperate borrower. Skill matters more than luck. The delusion every problem gambler told themselves. It's a tough game, I warned him. Tougher than it looks. Danny laughed. Can't be harder than framing houses in January. Over the next 3 weeks, I watched Danny's progression like someone watching their own home movie. $20 hands became $50 hands. Conservative play gave way to aggressive betting. The paint disappeared from under his fingernails, replaced by the soft hands of someone spending more time indoors. Got to ask you something, Danny said during a December shift when the casino was mostly empty. Christmas week, everyone home with family or spending money on presents instead of cards. What's up? You know any private games? Friend of mine says the real action's not here. My stomach tightened. Why do you ask? Buy-ins here are too small. 25 max bet. House takes rake. Too many rules. I want to play real poker against real players. I dealt him a blackjack and watched him tip $5 like it was nothing. 6 months ago, that $5 tip would have felt generous. Now it felt like a marker of someone who hadn't learned to count every dollar. Private games can be dangerous, I said. How so? Bigger money, bigger personalities. Things can get complicated fast. Danny doubled down on 11 against my 6. Drew a 10 for 21. Won another $50 with the kind of ease that made big bets feel reasonable. I can handle myself, he said. That's what I'd thought too. What everyone thought until the night they couldn't. That I should have warned him more directly. Should have told him about payday loans and maxed credit cards and lying awake at 4 a.m. calculating how many shifts it would take to pay back money you'd already lost. Instead, I dealt the next hand and watched Danny bet $100 on a pair of 8s against my ace showing. Terrible play. Emotional betting. The kind of decision that separated tourists from professionals. That he split the 8s. Drew a 10 and a 9. 19 and 17 against my ace-jack blackjack. Lost $200 in one hand. Rough beat, I said. Danny stared at the felt where his chips used to be. The same empty stare I'd seen on Jimmy's face 10 months ago. The same stare I'd warned myself after losing $500 to Kevin's pocket aces. Shit happens, Danny said. But his voice was different. Tighter. The voice of someone doing math in their head and not liking the results that he bought in for another 200. Lost it in 40 minutes making increasingly desperate bets. Double downs on weak hands. Insurance bets. Side wagers that any experienced player knew were sucker bets. Where's the ATM? Danny asked when his chips were gone. The question hit me like a physical blow. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I knew exactly how Danny felt asking it. The desperate hope that more money would solve the problem money had created. Past the slots, I said automatically. Near the restroom. Danny nodded and walked away. Left his jacket on the chair, his drink half finished. Like he was just stepping away for a minute instead of crossing a line he might never uncross. That I watched him disappear into the maze of slot machines and flashing lights. Carrying himself like a man walking to his own execution point. 10 minutes later. He was back with $400 bills. The cycle was starting over. And I was dealing the cards that would feed it, just like someone had dealt cards to me. The yellow paper was taped to my apartment door like a parking ticket, official and unavoidable. 3 days to pay or vacate. Legal action authorized beyond that point. January 15th. I'd been avoiding Mr. Rodriguez's calls for 2 weeks, letting his voicemails pile up while I figured out how to explain that December's rent had gone to Tommy's poker game and January's rent was still trapped in the payday loan cycle. I sat on my couch with the notice in my hands, reading the legal language that basically said, pay up or get out. No negotiation. No payment plans, no understanding landlord willing to work with a tenant who'd hit a rough patch. The math was brutal and simple. I owed $1,780 in back rent plus $220 in late fees. $2,000 even. My checking account had $23.17. My credit cards were maxed beyond maxed, over their limits and accumulating penalty fees daily. The payday loan apps had cut me off. Too many advances, they said. Credit risk too high. The companies that used to approve me for hundreds of dollars now wouldn't lend me $20. I spread my bills across the coffee table like tarot cards predicting a very specific future. Rent, $2,000 overdue. Credit cards, for $1,100 total, Minimum payments $180 monthly. Payday loans, $8,300 with interest and fees, payments eating half my take-home pay. Total debt, $12 for 100. The number sat there like a physical weight on my chest. $12,400. More than I made in 6 months dealing cards. More than some people made in a year. How had I gotten here? The progression felt both gradual and sudden, like watching someone age in time-lapse photography. Small bets became big bets. Smart plays became desperate plays. Temporary solutions became permanent problems. But even staring at the eviction notice, part of my brain was already working on solutions. Not real solutions, like getting a second job or calling a debt counselor, but gambling solutions. Patricia's Friday night game was still running. I knew because Tommy mentioned it occasionally, how the stakes had gotten bigger, how new players with deep pockets had joined the rotation. $500 buy-in had become $800. Sometimes more. I had 3 days to come up with $2,000. No amount of dealing shifts would generate that kind of money. But one good night at a serious poker game could solve everything. The idea was insane, and I knew it. I'd already lost $500 in that game. Lost it to better players who understood something about poker that I clearly didn't. Going back would be like returning to a casino that had already beaten you, hoping the machines had suddenly turned generous. But what choice did I have? Sleep in my car? Call my sister Angela, who I hadn't spoken to in 8 months. Admit to my family that the casino dealer who understood odds and probability had somehow managed to lose his apartment gambling? I picked up my phone and scrolled through old text messages until I found Patricia's number. Her last message was from October. Good game tonight. You should come back when you're ready. When you're ready. Like she knew I'd be back eventually. Like she understood that people who played at her level didn't just disappear after one bad night. That I typed a message. Is the Friday game still running? The response came back in minutes, every week. Stakes are bigger now. $800 minimum buy-in. You interested? $800. I didn't have $800. Didn't have $80, but I knew where to get it. The casino where I worked had a credit union for employees. Emergency loans for people facing eviction or medical bills. I'd never used it, never needed to before. The application was simple. Name. Employee ID. Reason for the loan. Amount requested. Reason. Unexpected medical expenses. Amount. $1,000.I. Submitted the application before I could think too hard about lying to the credit union that was trying to help me. Approved within hours. $1,000 would be in my account by morning. Enough for the poker buy-in and gas money. Enough for one last bet. Friday night. I drove to a different casino 40 miles from Riverside. Someplace where the faces wouldn't be familiar. Where my employee discount card wouldn't be recognized. Where I could just be another player trying to get lucky. The $1,000 credit union loan felt heavy in my pocket. 10 $100 bills that represented my last chance to solve $12,400 worth of problems in one night. That I told myself the plan was simple. Play conservative poker. Win enough to cover the rent and break even. Walk away clean. But sitting in the casino parking lot at 10 p.m., the plan felt more like a prayer. The poker room was smaller than Patricia's downtown game, but busier. 3 tables running. Mix of tourists and locals. Buy-ins ranging from $200 to $500. Perfect for someone who needed to turn $1,000 into $2,000 without attracting attention. First time here? Asked the floor manager, a tired-looking woman with dealer's hands and suspicious eyes. Visiting from up north, I said. Heard you had good action. She nodded toward an empty seat at the $500 buy-in table. Seat 7's open. You want in? I pulled out $500 and slid it across the felt. The dealer, a kid who looked barely old enough to work in a casino, counted out the chips with practiced efficiency. $500 in green and black chips. My last $500 in the world. The players looked familiar in the way all poker players look familiar. The old man in the baseball cap who only bet when he had the nuts. The young guy in the hoodie who bluffed too much. The woman with perfect posture who calculated pot odds before every decision. For the first hour, I played the tightest poker of my life. Folded everything but premium hands. Won small pots with good cards, lost small pots with marginal ones. By midnight, I was up to $680, almost enough to cover the credit union loan and still have money for the poker game I was really here for. But $680 wasn't $2,000. Wasn't enough to pay back rent and late fees. Wasn't enough to break the cycle of borrowing money to pay back borrowed money. At 1 a.m., I got dealt pocket kings. Beautiful hand. Second best starting hand in Texas Hold'em. The kind of hand you wait hours to see. The action came around to me. Young guy in the hoodie raised to 50. Woman with perfect posture called. Old man in the baseball cap folded. I looked at my kings and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Certainty. This was my hand. My moment. The card gods apologizing for months of bad beats and near misses. I raised to 150. Hoodie guy called immediately. Perfect posture thought for 30 seconds. Then called .3 players, 450 in the pot. Enough to make a real difference if I won. The flop came ace king 7, rainbow, top set. The nuts were close enough. Only pocket aces could beat me, and what were the odds of that? Hoodie guy checked. Perfect posture bet 200. My heart pounded. 200 into 450 was a big bet, but I had the best possible hand. She was probably betting a weaker ace, maybe ace king for 2 paired. I raised all in. $530. Hoodie guy folded immediately. Perfect posture studied me for what felt like an hour, her eyes moving between my face and my chips. Call, she said finally, pushing forward enough chips to cover my bet that I flipped over my pocket kings. Set of kings. She nodded and flipped her cards. Pocket aces, set of aces. The one hand that could beat me. The turn and river were meaningless. Ace ace king 7-4. Her set of aces beat my set of kings. And just like that, $530 disappeared. I sat there staring at the empty felt in front of me, feeling like someone who'd just watched their house burn down. The other players offered condolences, but their voices sounded far away. Rough beat, the dealer said. That's poker. But it wasn't just poker. It was rent money. Survival money. The last chance I'd had to dig out of a hole that had been getting deeper every day for 6 months. That I walked to my car in a daze, hands shaking as I tried to get the key in the ignition. The casino parking lot was full of people arriving for late-night sessions. Couples holding hands as they walked toward the bright lights and false promises. I had $470 left from the credit union loan. Enough for one more buy-in, one more chance to turn everything around. The payday loan kiosk in the parking lot was open 24 hours. Get up to $800 in minutes, the neon sign promised. No credit check required. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, staring at that sign. $800 plus $470 would be $1,270. Enough for 2 more shots at breaking even. The application took 3 minutes on my phone. Approved instantly. $800 appeared in my account like magic that had lost all its wonder. I walked back into the casino with $1,270 and the absolute certainty that this time would be different. 2 hours later, I walked out with $17 in my pocket and nowhere to go home to 6 a.m. Saturday morning. I sat on a bench in Riverside Park wearing my dealer's uniform and watching the city wake up around me. Joggers with expensive shoes and wireless headphones. Dog walkers with purebreds and biodegradable poop bags. Normal people starting normal Saturdays with normal problems. $17 in my wallet. $12,400 in debt. Homeless. The math was simple now. I couldn't afford rent, couldn't afford groceries, couldn't afford gas to get to work. The payday loan companies would start calling Monday. The credit card companies were already sending letters about missed payments and over-limit fees. I'd become everything I thought I was too smart to become. That a woman walked by with her morning coffee, glanced at me with that mixture of pity and discomfort people reserve for visible failure, then hurried past. I understood that look. I'd probably worn it myself, looking at other people's problems and feeling grateful they weren't mine. My phone had been buzzing all morning. Text from Tommy asking about tonight's game. A voicemail from Mr. Rodriguez about the eviction notice. 3 missed calls from unknown numbers that were probably debt collectors. I turned the phone off. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning fog that made everything look soft and forgiving. In a few hours, the park would fill with families having picnics, kids playing on swings, teenagers playing pickup basketball, people living the kind of life I used to think was boring. Boring sounded perfect now. A jogger stopped at the bench next to mine to stretch. Middle-aged guy in shorts and a t-shirt that said Worlds. Okayest dad. He nodded at me like people do when they're acknowledging shared humanity without wanting to get involved in the details. Beautiful morning, he said. Yeah, I said. Really is. He finished his stretches and jogged away, probably heading home to breakfast with his family. Coffee and newspapers and discussions about weekend plans that didn't involve calculating how much money you could borrow against next week's paycheck. I sat there until the morning shift change at the casino, watching my coworkers drive past the park on their way to work. Dave in his Honda Civic, Janet in her SUV, Tommy on his motorcycle. People who dealt cards for a living and went home to apartments they could afford and problems that had solutions if they'd figure out I wasn't coming to work eventually. Janet would call, leave voicemails, maybe send Tommy to check on me. They'd discover I'd borrowed money from the employee credit union under false pretenses. Lost my job along with everything else. The thought should have bothered me more than it did. But sitting on that bench in my dealer's uniform, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Relief that the lies were over. Relief that I didn't have to pretend anymore that I had everything under control. Relief that the worst thing I could imagine had finally happened, and I was still breathing. A city bus stopped across the street. Route 47, heading downtown. Same bus Jimmy Chin probably took to work every day. Back when he had a job and an apartment and a life that made sense. I wondered what had happened to Jimmy after that night in March. Whether he'd found help or just found new ways to lose money he didn't have. Whether he'd hit bottom like I had, or managed to stop before the fall. This BAD.my phone had one voicemail from a number I recognized. My sister Angela, who I hadn't talked to in 8 months. Ethan, it's me. I know we haven't talked in a while, but I had this weird feeling I should call. Are you okay? Call me back when you get this. I love you. I stared at the phone for a long time, thinking about what I'd say if I called her back. How I'd explain that her little brother, the one who was supposed to be smart about money and odds and probability, had somehow managed to lose everything to a system he understood better than most people. The truth was simple. I needed help. Real help. Not another loan or another bet or another scheme to turn bad luck into good luck. That I needed to admit that I was sick. And I needed someone to help me get better. The bus pulled away. But another one would come in 20 minutes. I had Angela's number in my phone and $17 in my wallet for the first time in months. That felt like enough to start over. The payphone outside the 7-Eleven still worked, somehow. 50 cents for a local call, coins I scraped from my car's cup holder and dashboard. Angela's number was burned into my memory from childhood. Back when memorizing phone numbers mattered, it rang 4 times before she answered. Hello, Angela, it's Ethan. Silence for a moment. Then, Jesus, Ethan, where are you? I've been worried sick. The words stuck in my throat. How do you tell your sister you're homeless? I'm in some trouble. What kind of trouble? Are you hurt? No, nothing like that. Financial trouble. I lost my apartment. Another silence, longer this time. Angela was 3 years older, had always been the responsible one. Steady job, nice house, husband who fixed things and remembered birthdays. The kind of life I used to think was boring. How much do you need? She asked. It's not. I don't need money. I mean, I do, but that's not why I'm calling. Then what? The words spilled out before I could stop them. I think I have a gambling problem. I've been lying to myself about being smart enough to beat the system, and I lost everything. My apartment, my savings, maybe even my job. I don't know what to do. I expected judgment, but Angela's voice softened. Where are you? Riverside Park. Slept on a bench last night. Listen, there's a Salvation Army with emergency beds. Go there tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out the rest. Just get somewhere safe. Her compassion broke me, not because she had all the answers, but because she didn't treat me like a failure. The shelter was cleaner but sadder than I imagined. The intake counselor, Sarah, handed me socks, a toothbrush, and a pamphlet. There's a meeting tomorrow night at the community center. Worth checking out. The next evening, I sat in a basement with fluorescent lights, terrible coffee, and 15 strangers. Marcus had lost his house betting on basketball. Jennifer spent her daughter's college fund on slots. When my turn came, the words felt foreign. My name is Ethan. I'm a casino dealer. I lost everything gambling. Thought I was too smart for this. They nodded. They understood. For the first time in months, I wasn't alone. 6 months later, I dealt my last hand at Riverside Casino. Management had let me stay after admitting my addiction, but I needed distance from the smoke and false hope. I found a studio apartment for $450 a month. Secondhand furniture, thin walls, but affordable. No casinos nearby, just walking distance to meetings. The debt, $12 for 100, was still there. With Sarah's referral, I set up payment plans, enough to keep food on the table while chipping away. Payday lenders had been the worst, but even they took plans when the alternative was nothing. Tuesdays and Thursdays, I went back to that basement. Same harsh lights, same bad coffee, different faces. Marcus found work at a hardware store. Jennifer confessed to her daughter and was working 2 jobs. Their stories reminded me recovery wasn't about winning. It was about enduring that I traded my smartphone for a flip phone. No betting apps, no distractions, just boredom that felt like freedom. The hardest part wasn't avoiding gambling, but living without shortcuts. No schemes, no one big win. Just slow progress. Work, save, pay down debt. One Thursday, Jimmy Chin showed up. He wore a construction uniform, thinner but clear-eyed. "For months clean," he said. "6." I answered. We stood by our cars. Men who'd survived choices we didn't want to repeat. "Drywall pays less than accounting," he said, "but I sleep better." I understood. Sometimes starting over meant stepping backward first. Driving home, I remembered that morning in Riverside Park, when a stranger's pity reminded me how easily anyone could end up here. Intelligence didn't make you immune to self-destruction. Recovery wasn't the cinematic transformation I'd imagined. No sudden clarity, no grand awakening, just daily choices. Some days were harder. Walking past sports bars, billboards promising jackpots, invitations to poker games. Most days, though, I worked, paid bills, saved small amounts. Angela called every Sunday. We talked about her kids, the weather. She never asked about gambling or money. She seemed to know recovery wasn't a single achievement, but a daily ACT to 86 months. My debt was down to $9,000. Still heavy, but smaller. The credit counselor said 3 years until freedom. Long enough to build habits, short enough to see the end. One July night. After finishing a shift, I walked through summer rain. Tomorrow was payday. Rent, food, debt, all covered. For the first time in over a year, I knew where every dollar was going. It wasn't the life I planned, but it was one I could live with. The routine felt like choice now, not punishment, and that made all the difference.